I'm going to say good evening, everyone, and I just wanted to welcome. We have over 250 people who sign up tonight, and we already have over 108 joining us. So this is absolutely fantastic. I just wanted to welcome. I see a lot of names that are very familiar to us. Solo quería dar la bienvenida. Hay más de 250 personas que han registrado esta noche para estar con nosotros en este evento. Ya puedo ver que en 2 minutos somos más de 114 personas aquí en nuestro evento. Bienvenidos a todos. Vamos a comenzar bastante puntuales y estamos todos más que felices de tenerlos con nosotros esta noche. Voy a empezar y solo quería darle las buenas noches. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Again, we're so excited that you're here with us tonight. I am Anca Badurina, and I am the Executive Director of Building One Community. It is my pleasure to present this evening program to you. We're thrilled to have with us Congressman Jim Hymes, U.S. Representative for Connecticut's 4th Congressional District, Chief Tim Shaw, the Chief of the Stanford Police Department, and Attorney Megan LaFontaine, the Chair of the American Immigration Lawyer Association for the Connecticut Chapter. Hola, buenas noches a todos y bienvenidos nuevamente. Mi nombre es Anca Badurina y soy la Directora Ejecutiva de Building One Community. Es un placer estar aquí con ustedes esta noche y presentar la charla. Estamos increíblemente honrados de contar con nuestros ponentes, el congresista Jim Hymes, representante para el 4º Distrito de Connecticut en el Congreso de los Estados Unidos, el jefe de la policía de Stanford, Tim Shaw, y la abogada Megan LaFontaine, presidente de la Asociación Americana de Abogados de Inmigración del capítulo de Connecticut. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We're very, very happy to have to be able to offer simultaneous interpretation for this evening. You can listen either in English or with simultaneous interpretation into Spanish. This is an experiment for us. We hope that it proves useful and we will be very interested in your feedback. Estamos muy contentos de poder ofrecer traducción simultánea esta noche, así que usted podrá escuchar esta charla bien en inglés o con traducción simultánea al español. Para escuchar el audio en español, usted tiene que hacer clic en el globo en la barra de control que tiene la etiqueta Interpretation. Es lo que puede ver, lo vamos a poner nuevamente en la pantalla. Aparece como Interpretation Available. Usted tiene que seleccionar español y después de seleccionar tiene que también pulsar donde dice Mute Original Audio. Si está participando a través de un smartphone o tableta, hay un paso extra. Primero tiene que hacer clic en el icono donde están los 3 puntitos con la etiqueta de More o More. Con este llegar a la pantalla de las opciones del idioma. Esta es la primera vez que ofrecemos interpretación simultánea, así que es casi un experimento para nosotros. Esperamos le resulte útil y nos encantará oír sus comentarios al respecto. Por favor, haga ahora cambio al idioma y si usted llegara a tener algún problema, háganoslo saber a través del Q&A, donde coloca Q&A. Haga clic en ese icono de Q&A y escriba su pregunta o comentario en el cuadro y pulse la palabra send. So please know that we will be recording tonight's sessions to make it available to other people that could not be here with us tonight. We have a wonderful panel this evening, and I'm sure you will have numerous questions for them. After the speakers have made their brief initial remarks, we will open up for discussions for your questions. In order to have a question, in order to ask a question, please click on the Q&A icon and write your question in the box. You may direct a question to a specific panelist or to the entire panel as you wish, and please write the question either in English or Spanish. We will only answer questions submitted by the Q&A. We're not using the chat feature tonight in this webinar or the raise a hand feature as well. So after that has been said and done, I will then begin my remarks. As many of you know, Building One Community is turning 10 this year. So over the last decade, we've been here for the community as a trusted resource of information, programs, and services to our local immigrant neighbors and the community at large. We hope that this year will bring many new developments that will be worthy of celebration. The beginning of the end of the pandemic is one of them, and recovery of jobs, especially in the service sector. And most importantly, an entirely new set of priorities for the federal government that are much more immigrant friendly, which is the topic of tonight's event. In his first month in office, President Biden has issued more than a dozen executive actions on immigration, and the US Citizenship Act of 2021 has been introduced by Democrats in both the House and the Senate. Our three speakers are all good friends of Building One Community, and they each bring very different perspective on the opportunities that the new environment will bring, but also the challenges that stand in the way of change. As always, the focus of Building One Community is on the practical ways in which the life of the immigrant community can be better and become more closely integrated into the lives of the cities and towns here in Stanford, in Fairfield County, and across Connecticut. Our first speaker is Congressman Jim Hymes. Jim has very ably represented the 4th Congressional District in the US Congress since 2009. Immigration policy has always been one of Jim's priorities. He's also, I think, the only US congressman born in Peru, and he spent many years growing up doing academic research and working in Latin America before being elected to Congress. Jim can help understand exactly how changes in law and regulations get made and what we can expect. So Representative Hymes, the floor is yours.
Anka, thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for pulling us together here tonight. Thank you for the wonderful work that Building One Community has done for so many years. I'm just delighted to be with Chief Shaw and with Megan at this very interesting moment, because I think it's fair to say that the nation's immigration policy with the inauguration of Joe Biden will be about as different as it can be relative to the 4 years of the Trump administration. And I'll get into some of the highlights and then be delighted to answer some questions. A mis amigos que están escuchando en español, estoy encantado de estar con ustedes y solo quiero decir que estamos en un momento en que nuestra política de inmigración está cambiando en manera muy grande. El nuevo presidente ya ha hecho cambios y vamos a empezar aquí en el Congreso a hacer también cambios en la ley. Pero quiero decir antes de convertirlo otra vez en inglés, no voy a repetir todo, solo quería asegurar a todos escuchando en español que mis oficinas en Stanford y en Bridgeport estamos a sus órdenes para ayudar en cualquier tópico relacionado a inmigración, visas, pasaportes, si hay problemas con las autoridades. Nunca hablamos con las autoridades, con la migra. Todos los reuniones en mi oficina son totalmente confidenciales y estamos a sus órdenes para ayudar. I won't do that again. I just wanted to offer up that help. Entiendo que hay un servicio de traducción y por eso voy a hablar en inglés.
Can I ask you it seems that we're having trouble in Spanish in the interpretation for some reason. So I would let you speak in English, but if we were not to be able to translate it immediately as we can, and we tried this before, I may ask you to do it again in Spanish if you don't mind.
Okay,
Or I'll
okay. You tell me what. There may be others who are better able to translate if the service doesn't work. But I'm happy to try if that's necessary. Hopefully not, because that'll reduce the amount of ground we can cover. So clearly, the nation's philosophy with respect to immigration has undergone a complete turn with the election of Joe Biden. And I won't get into the politics of this, but to say that the Trump administration, of course, made a real political point of vilifying immigrants, legal and undocumented, and was profoundly skeptical of immigration in the United States, which I never agreed with, because immigration, I think we are all immigrants. And immigration has, of course, for centuries been a source of real strength for this country, arguably the source of real strength for this country. We all came from different places, but almost all of us were immigrants at one point or another. So in order not to go on at great length, let me just say that the newly elected President Biden has issued a series of executive orders that will have a very real impact on the immigration policy of this country, but they are not changes in the law. And I need to draw a distinction between the executive orders, and I'll spend a minute or two on those executive orders, and changes in the law that we might see. Executive orders, of course, are subject, as we have seen in the immigration space, to a new president reversing the executive orders of the previous president, which of course is exactly what Joe Biden has done. Importantly, Joe Biden very quickly canceled the travel ban, which created a ban on immigration from roughly a dozen countries, most of which were Muslim majority countries. The president created a commission for family reunification. We have some, I believe the number is in the neighborhood of 600 children in this country who have yet to be reunited with their families subsequent to the morally abhorrent policy of family separation. The president also issued an executive order putting a pause on deportations, specifically on final orders of removal. The theory was that for a 100-day period, the Department of Homeland Security would review precisely who was being deported. Now, there it gets a bit complicated because a Texas judge has placed a stay on that pause. And this is one of the challenges associated with executive orders. They can be easily challenged by judges. And so there is a great deal of uncertainty about the question of ongoing deportations. What I can tell you about that is that the Biden administration will, like the Obama administration, be committed to concentrating removal efforts and enforcement efforts against the undocumented who are a national security threat because of some link to terrorism or, for example, to human trafficking or drug trafficking, and concentrating deportation efforts on those who are found to have committed a crime of some kind. I should say that I sometimes get the question, will deportation stop? They did not stop under President Obama, who had a very different immigration policy than Donald Trump did. At the end of the day, deportations will continue. My hope is that they will continue to be focused on those who present a national security threat or have some involvement in some kind of criminal matter. Importantly, there are changes in policy that will need to happen through a change in the law, that is to say, here in the United States Congress, some of which I think are relatively easy for us to get done. There is bipartisan support for a final and legal statutory stabilization of the status of the Dreamers of DACA. Lots of bipartisan support for that. At great long last, we could remove a lot of uncertainty that the roughly 800,000 Dreamers in this country experience. There is bipartisan support for a reform of our immigration system, and everybody around here has different opinions on how much should be H-1B immigration, where diversity visas, countries, quotas. But there is an understanding that our system is far too complex and should be addressed. There's also an understanding in the Congress that we need to not just think about the border, and quite frankly, one of the executive orders the new president put through was essentially stopping the construction of the wall. That while border security is important, it is important, we should turn our attention to the conditions in places like Honduras and El Salvador, conditions of violence and poverty that generate migration. So there will be an emphasis placed on trying to address the problem, not when it is at the border of the United States, but some of the challenges that, of course, generate the migration in the first place. There will be a return to full compliance with Americans' obligations with respect to refugees. Our behavior with respect to refugees is legally controlled by our obligations under international treaty. Those became, shall we say, ambiguous under the Trump administration, but we will go back to complying with international law with respect to asylum seekers and refugee issues. Lastly, there are areas in which law will be very difficult to change, and I could identify several, but let me just be very direct in saying that the probably most politically difficult issue here is how to handle the roughly 11 or 12 million undocumented people in this country. The good news is that I think the story you will hear out of the White House will be a story much truer to the reality of undocumented immigration, that undocumented immigrants are by and large working in our agriculture, are working in our restaurants, are working for our contractors, are working on our landscaping. You don't need to travel far in southwestern Connecticut to understand that that's a critical part of our economy. And that will be a contrast to the more, suggestions that the undocumented are largely engaged in criminal activity. But it becomes very controversial. So the president and various members of Congress have proposed what's known as an earned path to citizenship. The president specifically has proposed a 5-year process to get a green card. And the idea is that if you're undocumented and you have a history of complying with the law, of being employed, of paying your taxes, that after 5 years and a few other conditions being met, you could apply for a green card. Then after a period of an additional 3 years, that green card could be converted to an application for citizenship. I won't spend too much more time on that because that is the president's proposal, and it's similar to proposals that we've seen before in the Congress. But of course, it's subject to all kinds of debate and political argument inside the Congress. So it doesn't make sense to talk too much about the specifics there. But that concept is important, and it's a very difficult one. On the other side of the aisle, an awful lot of people call that amnesty, and that becomes a very challenging political issue. So without abusing my designated time here, let me just say that conversation will get quite heated. And I can't tell you if we're going to get a fully comprehensive immigration reform done, including that earned path to citizenship. But we're going to try. We're going to try. Two things we need to do. We need to, first of all, stop the vilification of the undocumented. They are people, and all too often they are not talked about as people, certainly in the last 4 years. It's why we need to make sure that law enforcement is protecting those people, regardless of immigration status, that if somebody is the victim of a crime, they don't feel badly approaching one of Chief Shaw's people to seek redress or protection. And we need to make sure that the undocumented aren't afraid to, if they're wounded or hurt or sick, go to our hospitals, seek medical care. And that's why I said what I did about seeking assistance in my office. So 2 things we absolutely can do. 1, stop the dehumanization. And 2, recognize that if you oppose an earned path to citizenship, you have to propose something that works. And I don't think there's anybody in Washington who believes that deportation for this population is at the end of the day the solution. And I don't need to tell this group why. You have plenty of households that are mixed, US citizen, undocumented. You have people who have worked for a generation in our communities. So it's a very, very complicated discussion. I'll just close by saying we're going to take a hard attempt at a comprehensive immigration reform, but it will be politically controversial and it will take some time. And Anka, let me stop there. I think I've used more than my designated 7 minutes.
More than welcome those 7 minutes and whatever you need to take. Very, very illustrating and illuminating what you're saying. So thank you for that overview of the executive orders and a bit of the reform as well. So I'm just going to say, please remember that you can submit your questions for Representative Hymes in the Q&A. As well as to any of our panelists, and we'll be taking those questions at the end of their presentation. So let me introduce now Chief Tim Shaw from the Stanford Police Department. Chief Shaw first joined the Stanford Police Department in 1988. He was sworn in as Chief of Police in April 2020, coming back to Stanford after a few years as Chief of Police in Easton. He has deep roots in the city of Stanford. Last summer, we hosted Chief Shaw for an in-person town hall in our center. It was one of the very few in-person events we had last year, and we hope to repeat these kind of direct interactions, especially as the pandemic recedes. Chief Shaw, please.
Thank you, Anka. I appreciate the invitation tonight, and Congressman Hymes, always a pleasure. And Megan, look forward to listening to you as well. With me as my translator, if needed, is Officer Adriana Molina, who most people in Building 1, I would say everyone knows her. She's my rock star, and I take her with me to protect me, but also she has a better way of explaining everything that we do to assist the immigrant community. But I will say, Stanford, most people know, is a very welcoming city. The mayor's office preaches it. We do as much outreach as possible pre-COVID. And one of the things during COVID, we worked with Building 1 and trying to get as many masks out to the community as possible. So even while we were down and out, we tried as much as we can to think outside the box to assist the community. I will say probably the most important thing, and I don't need much time as an intro, is Congressman Hynes touched it at the end. And I think the key for anyone on this call is that anyone who is a witness, anyone who is a victim, anyone who needs help from the police, I can tell you that this department has an open door policy for every individual in Stanford, regardless of status, regardless of race, regardless of color. The door is always open here. It's the reason I came back here 10 months ago, is because I believe in the officers that work within this building, and I believe on how we can move forward. And I look forward to working with Anka and her team. I look forward to finding out what Congressman Hymes and the new president unveils to make your lives a lot easier and more comfortable. But please remember, most importantly, that do not be afraid of the badge or the uniform in this city. It is here to assist you. It is here to answer your questions. And most importantly, it's here to protect you. So I do want to give Adriana just a minute to introduce herself, because she's here as well, and she does a lot in the community for those who don't know her.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Welcome, everyone. I want to take this moment again to introduce myself, Adriana Molina, and congratulate everyone that is participating in this. You have to be proactive and an advocate for yourself. And I'd like to also just echo what Chief Shaw, Representative Hynes, stated. You are part of our community, no matter what your legal status is. We embrace you, and you deserve the services of the community. So if you have any issues, please feel free to reach out to us, whether you're a victim or you're a witness of a crime. We're here to assist you, and we're here to service, because we do service our community, and you are part of it. Thank you for the moment, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Anka.
Thank you, Chief Shaw, and thank you, Officer Molina. I have to agree with you, Chief Shaw. She's also one of our heroes. And as many of you know, we've been working with the Stanford Police Department since the inception of Building 1 Community, and Officer Molina has been in our center countless of times, with our community. So she's part of who we are, and thank you for what you do. So let me introduce now Megan Lowney is the immigration attorney and chair of the American Immigration Lawyer Association, also known as AILA, for the Connecticut chapter. AILA is the premier organization for immigration lawyers in the United States and committed to the highest standard of practice. Good legal representation is the key to successful outcomes with the federal citizenship and immigration services and in immigration courts. She has built her own firm based in Middletown, Connecticut, and she focuses on some of the most challenging areas of immigration law, including asylum and removal defense. She's also very engaged in international adoptions. We're very pleased to have Megan here with us tonight. So Megan.
Thank you, Anka. And thank you, Representative Hymes and Chief Shaw and Officer Molina, who I've worked with before myself and with my clients. I am always pleased to be able to work with the Stanford Police Department. It's extremely helpful, and I want to echo what the Chief and Officer Molina said, that if you need help, that you can trust them and that they are a place to go in the community where you can get the help that you need. So, and to echo Congressman Hymes as well, that it's very important for you to get the help you need, whether it's medical services, police and security services, or immigration help through an immigration attorney, through Congressman Hymes' office, through B1C. Make sure you get help from someone who can actually provide it. And that's what I really want to focus my part of the presentation on. So you heard that there are some proposed changes to the immigration law, and I am hopeful that at least some of those changes will happen and make a huge impact in the lives of many people here in the US. But what is really important to know right now is that not very much has changed yet. I did see a question come up in the chat about applying for DACA. That is actually one of the things that has changed. The new DACA applications are now being accepted. So if you are looking to apply for DACA or perhaps renew an expired DACA or renew one that is expiring, you can do that. But other than very few things, not much has changed legally yet. It's a lot of conversation. So what that means is you can't file an application today for legalization based under President Biden's proposed act because there's nothing in the law yet. We have to wait to see what actually happens. And what I want to make sure you know is that sadly, there are a lot of people out there, attorneys and notarios and any number of individuals who will try to take advantage of you and tell you, no, you can pay me X thousands of dollars today and I'll make sure you get to the top of the list. Or pay me today and I'll prepare everything. There's nothing to prepare yet, except like I said, in very few cases, like DACA, where things have actually changed. So if you are getting legal advice, make sure you're getting it from an accredited attorney or representative. Make sure that if it sounds too good to be true, it may be too good to be true. So there are some other questions that I saw come up about, I've been here for a certain amount of time, how long, what do I have to do in order to get legal? There's a pathway to legalization called cancellation of removal that I'm sure many of you have heard about. If you've been in the US for 10 years and you have a US citizen child, parent or spouse, or a permanent resident child, parent or spouse, you can apply for cancellation of removal. But the really big caveat to that is you can only apply once you're in front of an immigration judge. It means you've already been arrested by immigration. It means that you're risking deportation if you lose your case. This is not something as simple as filing an application, hoping it gets approved, and risking no consequences if it doesn't. This is something very serious that can only be done in front of an immigration judge. Can't be done by someone who has not been arrested by immigration yet. So be very careful when someone tells you what you can qualify for and what you can start paying them to do for you without knowing exactly what those things are. So I think with that, I can just quickly talk about some of the things you can do to get ready in case any of these changes happen. You heard Congressman Hymes mention about proving how long you've been here, proving that you are a good person, proving you've paid your taxes. So these are things that you can start documenting on your own without paying an immigration attorney, without paying a notario, without paying anybody. Just something you can do on your own at home now. Make sure if you filed your tax returns that you have copies of tax returns, or that you know where you can get them through your accountant, through the online program that you may have used. Make sure you have access to that. If you have been here for a number of years, try to start collecting proof that you've been here for a certain number of years. And this isn't something that should be very strenuous for you. It should be something like, maybe if you have an old lease for an apartment, if you have some friends of yours who are citizens or permanent residents, making sure that you have their contact information so they could write a letter for you if they have to. If you have medical records, making sure that you know the names of the doctors or the hospitals where you can get those records. Don't go and get the records yet necessarily. Sometimes it's very expensive to get medical records. So I don't want you getting those if it's something you may not end up needing. But just make sure you know where to get this collection of information. So if it's required at some point down the road for a legalization application, a temporary protected status application, or even for DACA recipients, to prove that you've been in the US for a certain amount of time, you need documentation. And it's useful to start thinking about what documentation you may have and how you can get the documentation that may be a little more challenging for you to find. And with that, I think we can turn it back over to Anka and go into the questions. I'm sure people have a lot of very specific ones that would be useful to address.
Thank you, Megan. And I apologize. I think I called you Megan Lowney before instead of Megan LaFontaine. And Megan Lowney is a wonderful partner of ours. So I have to apologize for that. And thank you to you for providing such critical information. We do have a lot of questions, and there is a great deal of useful information and insight that you have all provided tonight. Certainly much food for thought and discussion. Jim, what I take from your comment is that positive change in immigration law will come, but it is hard to predict the timing and the exact content. President Biden and the Democratic Party have many priorities in addition to immigration, for sure. Chief Shaw, we always appreciate, and Officer Molina as well, we always appreciate the commitment of the police department and the city government to make a stand for a welcoming and inclusive city. Immigrants can live their daily life, go to work, go to church, and take their children to school without fear of being targeted for enforcement, and we thank you for that. And Megan, thank you for the reminders that of all the legal hurdles that immigrants face, persons who go to notarios, and you warn us against that, or rely on other unqualified help, risk doing permanent damage to their chances for immigration benefits, as well as possibly losing a lot of money. So we're going to take some questions from the audience now. We have a great number of them, and I have them kind of in different batches. And I'm going to start with Chief Shaw because I know that he might need to leave earlier. Chief Shaw, this question is for you. Can the police department protect immigrants who report crimes from gun retaliation?
Yes, that's the short answer, but I will say that, we have many options in regards to trying to assist with any crime within your neighborhood. Officer Molina has a direct line that she monitors. So that would be more of a phone number where people can call and leave a message and feel very confident that Officer Molina is the only person who's going to listen to that message. So if that's something, we can give you that so you can post that later. That's one thing we do. We also have a gun stopper program, which is an anonymous line for finding out if anyone has illegal guns on the street, trying to protect our community. That's been very successful with a reward system. So those are two ways. So we do know how. We work with the courthouse and make sure that anyone who gives us the information is protected, and we try to keep it anonymous as best we can. And I think those are some of the methods that we use.
Thank you so much. I'm going to direct a second question actually to Representative Hymes. And it says, Mr. Hymes, how do we stop deportations of persons who have no criminal record? Their only fault is entry without admission. News reports tell us deportations still take place.
Yeah, so I made reference to this earlier. President Biden instituted through executive order a 100-day pause on effectively all deportations except those that have a national security component to them. That policy was stayed by a federal judge in Texas. So we have a little bit of ambiguity on where we are on those things, on deportations. It is the intention of the administration to emphasize in any deportation activity, as I said before, criminal or national security threats, and to de-emphasize on humanitarian grounds. So in other words, people with family connections, people with no history of legal issues would be de-emphasized. What I can't tell you, because I can't tell you two things. Number one, how this will play out when it works its way through the courts. This concept of a 100-day pause in all removal activities. And I can't tell you if we will succeed in changing the law. I noticed a question about TPS, about Dreamers. A change in the law will provide security because yes, anybody under TPS status or DACA or a couple of other statuses would be able to apply immediately for a green card and not have to wait that 5-year period. So that would remove some of the risk of deportation for those populations. But I wish I could be more precise because again, the president's initiative is right now caught up in the courts. For the last 4 years, my office was involved in a number of attempts to stop final removals. It's a very difficult thing to do because at the end of the day, it is a judicial and legal process. It's not a political process. I do expect that the pace, intensity, and for lack of a better word, sort of some of the malice that we saw in the deportations will change pretty dramatically in with the new administration.
Thank you, Representative Hymes. And I have another question for you, Megan. There are several questions that tie around DACA. Somebody's asking, I applied, and I'm translating here, I applied for the Dreamers program and I did all my process, but they denied my application. I arrived to this country when I was 16 years old. I went to school here, I went to university. Would you know if you yourself could actually do something about my case?
So it would be important to take a look at the reason mentioned in the denial. And there was another question that came up about someone who was only 12 years old. I'm wondering if perhaps you came here too late. So you had to be here in the US by June of 2007 in order to qualify for DACA. And unless you're in removal proceedings, you have to be at least 16 in order to apply. So there are some requirements that may prevent someone, like the person who asked about the 12-year-old son. There may be some requirements that have not yet been met by you or other individuals, and as a result, you have to wait. For your specific case, I would recommend that you talk to an immigration attorney, show them that denial letter, and show them what you submitted to immigration, and hopefully the attorney can figure out why it may have been denied. Sometimes denials might be for criminal history. Sometimes it may be for lack of proof of your residence in the US. So I typically tell people to provide at least one document per year that they're here in the US. Ideally, probably about 5 documents per year. It could be school records, medical records. I saw on an unrelated note, someone asked if the drive-only license could be used for that. So if you did get a driver's license, you could use that as proof of your residence here in Connecticut and in the United States. So it could be any number of things that may have caused the denial in your application. It would be important to look at the letter itself.
Thank you, Megan, for answering that question. And Chief Shaw and Officer Molina, this question is actually for both of you. Chief Shaw and Officer Molina, during the last 40 years, undocumented immigrants were afraid to go to courthouse because there were ICE officers there frequently. Do you foresee a change?
I will say that I don't know what people saw when they were there, but I noticed Stanford Courthouse has the same rules that the state of Connecticut, which is based on the Trust Act. The ICE officers are only allowed if they actually have a federal warrant. They actually have to have a judicial warrant to be involved with anything in Connecticut. So I would not be concerned, because I know how the courthouse works. I know the state's attorney's office in Paul Forensic, and we have a lot of discussions on many issues, and this does come up. So I don't think people have to worry about the courthouse, because I know who leads that courthouse. And if they were on this call, they would be lockstep with us on protecting every person in Stanford. Adriana?
So I would have to agree with Chief Shaw on that one. I do, some of those concerns were brought to my attention. But again, there are some limitations and restrictions that they have to abide by. So with the new administration, I would expect that fear to minimize. And I think the whole goal is, getting the facts straight and the information correct. So.
We were talking before about the vilification of immigrants over the last, the whole rhetoric was over the last 4 years about vilification of immigrants, and that has changed tremendously. So we hope that with this new administration, that more positive narrative about immigrants in this country might also ease our own communities to get closer. Representative Hymes, this is for you as well. What are the chances of some assistance in the next round of CARES Act funding for members of the undocumented community now unemployed due to the pandemic? With service industries struggling, so many undocumented people are out of work and struggling, but are no programs to help them.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. And I can shed a little bit of light on, in particular, the bill that's being worked on right now that I anticipate will become law in the next 2 weeks or so. It's a very big relief bill. Everyone, regardless of immigration status, will be able to take advantage of many of the healthcare related initiatives. So vaccinations, tests, medical care, the provision of protective equipment will be done without reference to immigration status. And that's obviously a very good thing, consistent with the idea that we're protecting people and trying to save people's lives here, regardless of immigration status. The probability that there would be direct aid in the form of now what's being talked about as the $1,400. So a year ago it was $2,000. Then in December a bill passed that gave $600 in aid, and now this bill will contain $1,400 in aid for people making less than $75,000 a year. That will almost certainly not be available to non-citizens. We can talk about whether that's right or wrong. It's just, as a political reality, that's where the bill will end up. We have, however, made some progress there. In the first CARES Act, and I think people will be aware of this, the economic impact payment was not available to U.S. citizens in a mixed household, which was an awful outcome. I'm still not quite sure why it ended up that way, but both the $600 and the $1,400 payment will now be available to U.S. citizens who do live in mixed households. Any administrative issue with that, of course, you can either work it through with the IRS, which is the agency that administers the program, or my office would be very happy to be helpful. We've had lots of cases like that where people have been administratively challenged. Then there's a little bit of a gray area where I have to plead a little bit of ignorance. So for example, the aid that has been available to small businesses in the form of the Paycheck Protection Program and what are known as the EIDL loans, it's not at all clear to me that employees of businesses have had to show any particular immigration status. But I'm going to stop there just because I don't actually know what has occurred in that area. Obviously, there are plenty of businesses where they got paycheck protection loans that are really grants. They're really, at the end of the day, forgivable loans, and so therefore grants. And I don't know the history there, but I do know that there hasn't been a particular documentation procedure with respect to the immigration status of the people working in those businesses. Lastly, I'll just make this point, and again, here I'm on a topic that as a federal official, I'm not as briefed as I should be on, but maybe Anka or somebody else can help me. I know that the state of Connecticut is considering a number of direct economic aid programs that might be available to to people regardless of immigration status, and therefore possibly to the undocumented. But Anka, I'm going to appeal to you for help there because I'm not fully briefed on what the state is considering.
I can certainly answer to that. And it has been for over 6 months already that we were one of the agencies that the state of Connecticut subcontracted through Citi, another agency dedicated to immigrants and refugees in Connecticut. And we've been supporting the undocumented community with rental relief. Initially, there were $2.5 million dedicated to that, and that kind of stopped already. That fund has been used, but there are certainly conversations of another round of funds for that purpose as well. So as soon as we know more, we will put it out there for our community to be able to apply for that funds. I also wanted to refer to something that you said before, Megan, to look for an attorney. And you know, one of the things of why we put this panel together was precisely that, because we were hearing many of our immigrant communities going to notarios that were being promised a lot of things that in the end cause more trouble than any benefit to our immigrant folks. And you know, most of you here in the panel know, but if you don't know, I just wanted to remind you that Building One Community has an immigration legal services with a number of attorneys and DOJ reps in-house ready to help. There is an issue of capacity, but you know, be patient for us to get a consultation with you if that's the case, but we're more than happy to support the way that we can. I'm going to refer another question to you, Megan. Is there a chance for executive, and the question is for either of you, Representative Hymes or Megan, is there a chance for executive orders to be further clarified by the president? Is there a chance for DACA to be rewritten by President Biden and admit people that are students and were not able to apply for DACA because of the cutoff date of 2007?
Let me very quickly give an answer to that question. Megan probably has a better feel than I do for some of the details and the impact on the ground. DACA is in its entirety an executive program. And in fact, that is why it has been subject to these swings and why the Dreamers have been subject to so much uncertainty, because it has no standing in law. In other words, it wasn't ever incorporated into statute. I made reference to this earlier when I said that there is strong bipartisan support for getting it into statute, which would make it firm and not subject to change by whoever is the next president. I think there's a good chance that that can happen. And in the process of that happening, yes, Congress is in no way constrained by the current program. Congress could say, we want to change the eligibility dates, the eligibility terms. That can be a double-edged sword. So, you know, change doesn't necessarily mean good change, but I do think that there's a pretty good probability that it will be incorporated into law as opposed to executive order, which is important for stability and predictability. And yes, there is the opportunity to alter the terms of DACA when and if that happens.
Thank you for answering that. I have to say that we have over 200 participants already today, and questions are coming fast and furious, so we might not get to all of them today. Some of them are specific, and I will tell you, to those that have a specific question to your case, I will say that at the end, but every Wednesday, every third Wednesday, we hold a session of Q&A with our attorney. Maybe those particular questions can be referred to that session instead of today. I will take another one for Chief Shaw. And the question is, what is the plan if we get in the situation of vandalism and riots episodes like we had in New York, Portland, etc.? How are you planning on protecting local businesses and citizens from those? God permits, we never get there.
Well, let's hope we're past that with the new administration, and we're hoping that is in our rearview mirror. However, I can speak on the ones that we had in Stanford already. You know, we had multiple protests, upwards of 2,000 people marched through the city. They voiced their opinions. We as a department gave them the space, but we also protected the property. So that's the delicate balance in which we have. We have, if something of that magnitude that would seem to be a little bit more than a city can handle, we have partnerships within the Fairfield County area to assist us. But so far, because of the dialogue that we continue to have with the community, especially over the summer, we sat with many of the people who were involved in the protest. We listened to them, and we've tried to make some changes within the department. So we're trying to ever evolve in this time, and we're only hoping that as spring comes, there's a new fresh air for everybody. But we're prepared. We've had a couple, we'll say, practice runs with some of the ones we've had already, and they went well. And the people came, spoke, and left on most occasions.
Thank you, Chief Shaw. And this might be one of our last questions, if not the last one, and I think it is for you, Jim. Can we expect an end to the extreme vetting of naturalization applicants?
Yes. Extreme vetting was one of the things that the last White House put out in an effort to, I think, create some anxiety about the overall process. There were some real changes in the naturalization process, including a change to the test, which I understand that the current administration is reviewing. I haven't gotten into the details of the new test versus the old test, but I'm told by some people that it's considerably harder. So yes, I do believe that this administration is going to use its executive authority to dial back some of the clearly prejudicial anti-immigrant initiatives that were undertaken by the last administration. I can't tell you exactly which ones. This will be an ongoing process, but yeah, this is all part of the larger issue of an embrace of the idea that immigration is good and we should do more of it. Even as we're not saying, and Joe Biden will never say, that we should, have the status quo immigration policy, or that we don't, for example, that ICE will be abolished or that CBP will be abolished. I mean, the nation will continue to protect its borders and will, in some cases, very sadly, continue to deport people who are here on an undocumented basis. Our hope, of course, is that all of that will be much more humane and targeted in a way that is about keeping people safe, rather than sending an anti-immigration message, which, again, not to be political, but that was an important component of the last president's appeal to his political base.
I completely agree, Jim. Thank you for saying that. I'm going to take the last question, actually, and it's an important one. And Megan, maybe you can answer this one. Someone in the audience is asking, is the public charge going to be eliminated? And the person is saying it is very difficult for families.
Can't you give someone else that question? I'm kidding. It is very difficult. And every day I talk to somebody about the public charge, I tell them that we have to look every day to see if it's changed. I'm sure it sounds like the person who asked the question already knows a little bit about it. Just to let you know, for those who don't, the Trump administration had put into effect some new changes about whether someone will be a public charge in the US and prevent them from becoming permanent residents or obtaining status here. And there was an entirely separate form that you had to complete, entirely new evidence you had to submit. That was challenged through the court system, and there were court rulings issuing injunctions, staying the injunctions, all sorts of things changing pretty frequently throughout the summer and fall of last year. I am hopeful that this is something that will change, because it certainly was one of the more horrific things that the Trump administration did, but I don't know what exactly will happen. And like I tell all of my clients, it's just something that we have to check day by day to see how it may impact your case and to see if any changes have been made that will be helpful to you.
Thank you, Megan. We have tons and tons of questions. We will try to get back to you directly. We have your email addresses and we know who is asking the questions. So we're very sorry that we cannot get to all the questions tonight because we're coming to an end. This has been indeed a very engaging evening. Thank you for the inspiring conversations and for answering all these very solid questions. We do know that the path forward won't necessarily be easy. For 4 years, as we discussed before, we lived under an anti-immigration agenda, and there is much to be undone. There is, without a doubt, a great need for progress through lasting reforms. At B1C, at Building One Community, we're ready to meet this moment. We celebrate and join the new administration in making our vision of a fair and welcoming immigration system a reality. At the local level, we're incredibly grateful to count with partners like you, 4, with our Officer Molina, our speakers tonight that share a common vision of one welcoming community in which all immigrants are thriving and contributing members. So thank you again to all our panelists for an inspiring conversation. Tons of virtual applauses go to you all. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We'd love having you all with us. And stay tuned, we're gonna share on the screen because our next virtual Q&A with our immigration attorney is on March 10th. Our head of the Immigration Legal Services, Adriana Podesta, hosts a free 1-hour question and answer session. Adriana will address any immigration law questions that you might have. The session takes place both in English and Spanish. You can always follow us on Facebook or any of the social media where we post these events and all the information that we have. So I just wanted to thank again our panelists and everyone that joined us tonight. Be well and take care, and thank you again. Good night, everybody.